Hi, this is Esther with Discover Your Origins. In this video, we are returning to the James L. Thomas case. I have a whole playlist if you want to go back and see the discoveries we've made on this case previously. This James L. Thomas is the one that is married to Sarah May, and in the previous video, we found indirect evidence using extended family relationships that ties this James L. Thomas and Sarah May to John L. Thomas. In other words, this James L. Thomas is probably the son of John L. Thomas because of those extended relationships. Be sure and watch that previous video to see how I reached that conclusion. And if you want, I have a blog article that goes along with the previous video that has all of the source citations as well. So we were able to find some evidence, at least for this James L. Thomas, that shows that he is the son of John L. Thomas. The difficulty has been that there are two James L. Thomas profiles. They both have the same birth year, and they are both born in Alabama, with fathers born in Virginia, and the only difference is that they have a different wife and children. And the wives kind of cascade in time where they could sequentially follow each other, except for this tiny little overlap in the 1870 census in which the two wives exist at the same time. In any event, in this video, we're going to look at some census records and see if we can't tease out some more research opportunities and evidence for James L. Thomas and Sarah May, at least. And we may look at James Lloyd Thomas and his wife, Emily. After that, we will look at what our next steps are, because the next steps are going to involve a fair amount of work and research. And so I'm just going to outline them, and then we'll probably move on to another project. And I will pass on my notes to the person who submitted this so they can continue working. But let's start by looking at Sarah May. Okay, so here is Sarah May, and if we go to her sources, we have this 1870 census. And the problem with this census is that Sarah is in the census by herself with her children. James is nowhere to be found. And so the question is, did he die? Were James and Sarah separated for some reason? I haven't been able to find any evidence of a divorce. I did use the Family Search full text search to look in court records, and I didn't see anything. That doesn't mean a divorce didn't happen. Sometimes people just separated and lived separately, but it's hard to say that that happened, and we don't know if James died. So what we want to do is look at the 1866 Alabama State Census. If James died because of the war, Sarah would be listed in that census. If James survived, then he would be listed in that census. And so we want to see if we can find James or Sarah in that census. And so one way that we can find that census is to go to the Family Search Research Wiki. So let's do that. This will also tell us what other censuses are available to look at for Alabama. All right, so we'll just do Alabama genealogy. And while we're here, we'll just look at this county map for Alabama. Now, the James Thomas that married Sarah May lived primarily in Autauga County. That's that central county here in Alabama. And then you have to go a couple counties up, and here is Jefferson County, and that is where the other James Thomas lived. And he lived along the border between Jefferson and Shelby County, and so he spent time in both of those places, but it's still a fair distance apart. And so it is possible that James Thomas could have relocated after the Civil War and started a new family. Things happen, right? But it is a fair distance, and it does seem like the Thomas family, this particular Thomas family, is pretty tied to Autauga County. So, you know, hard to say. We're still looking. But we're going to look in the census, so let's do that. All right, so every census that is connected with Alabama is here in this document, and we'll scroll down, and one census we could look in is this 1870 mortality schedule. So if James died in 1869, he could be listed in this schedule. And I'll just, full disclosure, have already looked and he's not there. So it doesn't mean he didn't die. It's just he's not in that mortality schedule. All right, let's keep going. We want to go to this 1866 state census. So let's open that in a new tab. And let's first do a search for Sarah. Now this census is unique because it was a census that was taken right after the Civil War had ended. And it's really important because if a soldier had died, his widow would be listed in the census. So it's very useful. Let's put in Otaga County because that's where she was. And we'll hit search. Okay, so no Sarah Thomas, but let's go ahead and look for James, because maybe James did survive the war. Right, there are several James Thomases here, so you would need to look at each of them. One thing I want to point out is there are several men here named James Thomas, so it is a fairly common name, and it would be easy to see how somebody could be linked to the wrong family if you're not paying attention. And so, you know, we want to be careful and look at these carefully. And in full disclosure, I have looked at most of these already, and this top one I think is our James Thomas. So let's go and look at it. And while that's loading, let's just go back and we just need to look at the ages of the individuals here. So James Thomas in 1866 would be 32 years old. Sarah would be 29, and then the children would be under 10 years old. So we just need to know that because the 1866 census is similar to the early federal censuses where you just had a count. You didn't have a list of the family names. So let's actually go and look at that image and see. So you can see we got the columns with the age ranges. And we're just going to zoom in here and look for James Thomas. Okay, so here's James Thomas. This first column is for male children under the age of 10. And so we have 2. So that definitely matches up. And then this column, we'll have to go up here and look, is for males 30 to 40. So that definitely matches. So we also want to look at the females. So we have 1 female under 10 years old. So that matches. And then another female that's 20 to 30. So that seems like a really good match. The age ranges and the number of people in the family all match. So I did go ahead and attach this record to our James Thomas that's married to Sarah May. There isn't anything else in the columns related to the veterans. So this is soldiers who have been disabled or killed. So if he was injured in the war, he recovered. And so we could say that our James Thomas, here he is, survived the war. What does that mean? It means that we know where James Thomas was up until 1866. And then between 1866 and 1868 to 70, we don't know what happens. Sarah is alone in 1870. If he remarried to Emily Hitt in 1868, you know, there's that overlap there. There's that 2-year gap where it's hard to know what happened. Marriage to Emily Hitt, his first wife is still alive in 1870. It just doesn't seem to quite jive. Like there's something not right there. And I think that's why there's this question of the 2 profiles. So, but between 1866 and 1870, that's the window of when we need to look and see if we can't figure out what might have happened. All right, so I did go ahead and attach that census. You can see here on Sarah May that it's attached, and that provides that evidence that the family was still together at that time. All right, so now let's open up the records and do a little bit of searching. Now I'm just going to do a few example searches. You could spend quite a lot of time varying your search to see if you can come up with some interesting new opportunities. But I'm going to start with the 1850 census. Now we already have a James Thomas in Otago County. If the two James Thomas profiles are different men, then we have to consider additional parental candidates for the one that's married in Jefferson County. So I want to do a search for a James Thomas in Jefferson County, Alabama. And he would be born about 1834. So let's see if we can't find some other James Thomases to look at. Okay, now this top one is the one that is connected to our John Thomas family. So this is the one that provides documentary evidence for that relationship. And it's direct evidence there. And then there are some additional James Thomases. So one thing that we may want to do here is just create a table in our notes with all of these James Thomases and start to trace them, see what happened to them. And even though they may be located in different counties or whatever, we want to trace them and just rule them out as other possible James Thomases and their parents. You know, here's a James C. Thomas. Someone's got him connected to the family tree, this record. We also want to consider Shelby County because our James Thomas spent time in Shelby County. Now, we could do the same thing for Sarah May in the 1880 census. So if Sarah remarried, she could have a different last name in the 1880 census, and it would make sense for her to remarry. She had young children, and if she was a widow or somehow otherwise separated, then she probably did remarry. So let's just look for a Sarah, born in Alabama, about 1837. And let's just see what we find. Now, we would probably want to narrow it down because look, there's 6,000 possible results. And she could have remarried and moved other places in Alabama. But if we want to narrow the possibilities, we could do Otago County and just look there. And you can see here we've got some interesting results. I didn't bring up anybody in Otago County. But between 1870 and 1880, that's a 10-year gap. So she could have remarried and had several children in that time. So if we really want to try to find Sarah again, we need to make a list, like I was saying for James, do the same thing for Sarah, and see if some of these might possibly be a match. And look at the members of these households and see if maybe they could match up with her children. You know, it's one of those projects that would take some time. And, you know, it's up to you if you want to go down that road and see if you can't figure out if could possibly be Sarah May. You can also do a similar search in Alabama marriage records to see if a Sarah Thomas got married after 1870. It could be pull up some possibilities. So those might be some next steps to continue trying to dig into the census and really try to eliminate all possibilities of them being two separate men or being the same men of the James Thomases. All right, so that is Sarah May. Now, I do want to go and look at the James Lloyd profile and his wife, Emily, because they would have had to meet. And so I want to just spend a little bit of time looking where Emily was living in 1860. And let's see if we've got a census record for her. Now, she would have been married to her first husband, Oh, we don't even have an 1860 census for her. Interesting. Okay, so let's put that on our to-do list to find a census record for Emily. She should be married to James Mann in 1860 in Jefferson County, Alabama. Does he have a census record? He doesn't have a census record either. So let's go search records, and let's pick the 1860 census, and let's look for James Mann in Jefferson County, Alabama. Interesting. All right, so definitely need to see if we can't figure out why Emily is not in the 1860 census with her children. I think some more research needs to be done on James Mann and Emily for sure. Okay, so what are some next steps? I just want to go to the Family Search Research Wiki again. So let's go back. And let's go to Ataga so I can just show you the kinds of things you could continue to dig into. So the Thomas family was pretty prevalent in Ataga County. They intermarried with other families there. And so I would suspect that they are mentioned, or one of the other families, the Dennis family or the Connell family, are mentioned in local histories. And so you could definitely dig into local histories, but also probably spend some time looking at the Ataga County Heritage Association and the Ataga Genealogical Society. And they both have websites. So, for example, the County Heritage Association has a museum. So if we come down here, you can see it. And they do have local family history, Civil War room, and genealogy information. So you probably will have to spend some time calling them or asking about what research is available if they do lookups, or even visit there in person if you can to get to see what they have, because I would bet they have something. So definitely worth digging into that. And then also the Ataga Genealogical Society. They didn't have very much listed on their website as to the resources they have, but they do have a quarterly Ataga Ancestry magazine. And I don't know if they have a back catalog that you can purchase, but I would bet they have something on the Thomas family in there. It's only $25 a year to join, so it's not very expensive. And you could definitely reach out to them and see if they also do lookups for you if you join. It definitely would be worth it. You could also see if the Family Search Library has a copy of the Ataga Ancestry magazine. So those are a couple of things to add to the research plan to do. These are the kinds of things that take a little bit more time and effort to research, but can really have a big payoff. Okay, so going back to the research wiki, you could also do similar things in Jefferson County and Shelby County to see if you can't find more information about those counties and see if they have anything about James Thomas. There are some additional libraries. There's the Ataga Prattville Public Library, and they may have a family history section, so also worth looking at them as well. So put that on your to-do list. Now, finally, we need to go back to Sarah May. Okay, so here we are back with Sarah May. And another next step that I'm going to recommend is to do descendancy research. So that means researching William E. May and all of his children and their descendants up to the modern day, if you can. But at least start with Sarah May's siblings and finding everything out about them as you can. Try to find them in every possible census. It looks like on Family Search, at least, there's not been a lot done. And so there's some opportunities here to make some discoveries. If Sarah May was alone in 1870. Where would she have gone if she didn't remarry? And I would bet that she went with family. And so it is worth doing descendancy research to see if her or her children ended up with any of her siblings. Because if Sarah died, where did her young children go? So, that's definitely something that you may want to consider, is that if she died, the children went somewhere and they probably went to extended family. So definitely spend some time doing some descendancy research on Sarah May and her siblings, and then going back to the Thomas family. The same thing. Research all of the Thomas siblings and descendants, and it looks like there's been a fair amount of work done there. So just go through and check and add source records and look at all of them, and continue to extend the descendancy research to today. In other words, see if you can't find some descendants of John L. Thomas who descend through one of these possible siblings who would be willing to do DNA testing. Because I think at the end of the day, to really get some good answers, because we're getting close to where we've exhausted documentary research, at least the easy stuff. There may be some other things out there that we could look at. But at the end of the day, DNA may be the thing that fills in the gap. So by doing descendancy research on Sarah May and John L. Thomas and Sarah's father, we may be able to identify some descendants and see if they share DNA with the person who submitted this research question. If they don't, then James Lloyd Thomas is somebody else and is not connected to this family. And you probably will need to test more than one descendant to be absolutely sure, because DNA inheritance is random, and so sometimes the descendants may not inherit any DNA. But this is forward enough in time. Hopefully there are some people that still have some DNA that would be shared. Do some local county history research, do the descendancy research, and then start looking into DNA. Anyway, that's a lot to do. Those are some pretty big projects. And so we're going to hand this over to the person who submitted this. I'll give her a copy of my research notes so she can kind of use that as a jumping off point to continue doing some deeper research. And we'll start a new project next time we meet. So I hope that was helpful when you have a difficult project like that, trying to come up with new areas to research. And I think this case will eventually get solved. I feel pretty good about that. So until next time, we'll see you later.